My name is Charlotte. I'm 28 years old, and I was staring at the text message that just shattered my world. You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser. 3 days before my sister Madison's wedding, after I'd already bought my dress and taken time off work. All because I'd questioned her fiancé Blake's suspicious behavior at that hotel last week. My apartment door suddenly burst open, and my dad Frank stormed in, his face red with fury, phone clutched in his hand. Pack your things, Charlotte. We're going to that wedding whether she wants us there or not. The look in his eyes told me he knew something explosive about Blake, something that would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with family betrayal or toxic siblings, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this all unfolds. Trust me, what my dad discovered about Blake will shock you as much as it shocked me. Growing up with Madison was like living in someone else's shadow, except that shadow had teeth and claws. She was 2 years older than me, 30 now, and from the moment she could walk, she was the golden child who could do no wrong. Perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect everything. She became a surgeon while I settled for being a marketing manager, though I loved my job and was good at it. Our parents' divorce 10 years ago split our family right down the middle, with Mom Sandra immediately taking Madison's side while Dad saw through her manipulations and stood by me. That's when Madison's true colors really started showing, though I'd been too naive to see the pattern that had been building for years. The systematic destruction of my relationships with extended family began shortly after the divorce. Madison would visit aunts, uncles, and cousins with carefully crafted stories about my supposed jealousy and instability. She'd cry crocodile tears about how hard it was to have a sister who resented her success, how I'd supposedly said terrible things about family members behind their backs. By the time I realized what was happening, most of our relatives had already chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. The first major betrayal came during my senior year of college, when I was dating Ryan, my first serious boyfriend, who I thought might be the one. Madison had been unusually supportive of our relationship, always asking about him, insisting on double dates when she was between boyfriends. I should have known something was wrong when she volunteered to plan my birthday party at her apartment. I arrived early to help set up and found them together in her bedroom, his hands in her hair, her lips on his neck. The sound that escaped my throat wasn't quite human, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. But Madison's mask slipped back on within seconds, and suddenly she was crying, telling everyone who arrived for the party that I had attacked her in a jealous rage, because Ryan had chosen her over me. She actually convinced people that she was the victim, that I was the one who had tried to steal her boyfriend, not the other way around. Most of our cousins believed her, especially when Ryan backed up her story, claiming I'd been possessive and unstable. Dad was the only one who saw through the lies, pointing out that Madison had a history of taking whatever I cared about, from toys when we were children to friends in high school. I rebuilt my life slowly after that betrayal, throwing myself into my marketing career and eventually meeting David, a software engineer whose kindness and integrity were the complete opposite of Ryan's weakness. For a while, I thought Madison had finally left me alone to live my life. I was promoted to senior marketing coordinator, had a great group of work friends, and was finally happy. That's when Madison struck again. She started showing up at networking events in my industry, befriending my colleagues with her surgeon credentials and charm. Within months, she was having lunch with my work friends, and strange rumors began circulating about my supposed inappropriate behavior with clients, my alleged drinking problem that didn't exist, and confidential information I'd supposedly leaked. I nearly lost the promotion I'd worked 3 years for until Dad intervened. He'd hired a private investigator to document Madison's activities and presented the evidence to my boss, showing how she'd fabricated emails and manipulated conversations. My boss was horrified and apologetic, but the damage to some relationships was already done. That's when I finally understood the pattern that Dad had been trying to show me for years. Madison didn't just want to be better than me, she needed to destroy anything that brought me joy. It wasn't enough for her to be successful. She needed me to fail. Every achievement I earned, every relationship I built, every moment of happiness I found became a target for her to obliterate. 2 weeks before Madison's wedding, everything changed when I accidentally stumbled onto Blake's secret. I was meeting a client at the Marriott downtown, when I saw him in the lobby, with a woman who definitely wasn't my sister. They were standing too close, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist in a way that screamed intimacy. My first instinct was to confront him, but something in their body language made me pull out my phone instead and start recording. They moved toward the elevators, and I followed at a distance, my heart pounding as I watched them disappear behind closing doors. The smart thing would have been to tell Madison immediately, but I knew she'd just accuse me of trying to sabotage her happiness. I needed proof, concrete evidence that even she couldn't deny, or twist into another story about my jealousy. I spent the next 3 days playing amateur detective, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. Blake's investment firm, the one he bragged about at every family gathering, was a shell company with connections to money laundering operations across 3 states. His gambling debts ran into the hundreds of thousands, and the people he owed weren't the type to accept payment plans. I found court records, police reports from other cities where he'd lived, and most disturbing of all, articles about his previous fiancée, who had disappeared without a trace 2 years ago. Her family maintained she'd never have left voluntarily, but without a body or evidence of foul play, the police had classified her as a missing person rather than investigating Blake for murder. Armed with printed documents, photos, and bank records showing suspicious transfers, I went to Madison's apartment to warn her. I genuinely thought sisterly concern might break through our toxic dynamic, that surely she'd want to know her future husband was dangerous. She listened to my presentation with an eerily calm expression, flipping through each piece of evidence without comment. When I finished, she leaned back and smiled, and it was the coldest smile I'd ever seen on her face. I know all of this already, Charlotte. Did you really think I'd marry someone without doing my own research? The difference between us is that I see opportunity where you see obstacles. Blake's connections will make us richer than you can imagine, and I'll be protected because I'm valuable to him. But you're just a problem that needs solving. The first attack came that night while I was still processing Madison's chilling response. I heard the breaking glass before I saw my car, all 4 tires slashed and every window shattered in the parking garage of my apartment building. Anonymous threats were tucked under the windshield wipers, printed photos of David and me at dinner the previous week, at the grocery store, even one of me through my bedroom window. The message was clear, we were being watched, and this was just the beginning. The next morning, David called me in a panic, because his employer had received an anonymous tip about my supposed mental instability, and my dangerous influence on him. Attached were doctored screenshots of text messages I'd never sent, talking about violence and revenge fantasies. His boss knew him well enough to be skeptical, but the HR department insisted on a full investigation. That's when I finally called Dad, and told him everything through hysterical tears. His silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected, but then he spoke in a voice I'd never heard before, cold and determined. I've been investigating Blake for months through my old contacts from the force. I didn't want to worry you until I had something concrete, but Charlotte, it's worse than you know. His previous fiancée isn't the only woman who's disappeared after getting involved with him. There are at least 2 others, and Madison knows about all of them. She's not just marrying a criminal, she's becoming one. The next attack came while we were still on the phone, my apartment door splintering as someone broke in while I hid in the bathroom, listening to them destroy my home office and steal my work laptop. When the intruders finally left, I emerged to find my personal photos scattered across the floor, each one marked with red excess over faces. The message scrawled across my living room wall in red paint was simple. This is just the beginning. Back off, or it gets worse. Among the chaos, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. I warned you not to interfere. Every day you continue this crusade, the price gets higher. And just so we're clear, Blake's friends have very creative ways of making problems disappear. You've seen the news articles about his ex. Do you really want to join her? The threat was explicit now, not even veiled in her usual manipulation. She was telling me outright that she'd rather see me dead than let me interfere with her plans. Madison's campaign to destroy me shifted into overdrive once she realized I wouldn't back down despite the threats. She weaponized the wedding like a nuclear bomb, calling every relative with tearful stories about her unstable sister trying to ruin the happiest day of her life. According to her version of events, I was consumed by jealousy over her successful career and handsome fiancé, so desperate to destroy her happiness that I'd fabricated lies about Blake and even staged the attacks on myself for attention. She claimed I'd threatened to show up at the wedding and cause a scene, that I'd been sending her disturbing messages and following Blake around town. The emails our relatives received from my supposed account were masterfully crafted, full of bitter rants and delusional accusations that painted me as completely unhinged. Of course, I'd never sent them, but Madison had always been tech-savvy enough to make them look authentic. The fourth betrayal cut the deepest, because it came from Mom. Despite everything Madison had done over the years, I'd held on to hope that our mother would eventually see the truth. Instead, she publicly supported Madison at a family gathering, standing in front of 40 relatives to denounce me as troubled and suggest I needed professional help. She revealed personal details about my therapy sessions after the divorce, twisting my processing of childhood trauma into evidence of instability. The coup de grace was when she announced that she was changing her will to leave everything to Madison, claiming I couldn't be trusted with financial responsibility. The assembled relatives nodded along, shooting me pitying looks that said they bought every word of this narrative. The third attack on my life came through David when his workplace was vandalized with spray paint calling him a pedophile and worse. Security footage mysteriously corrupted, and anonymous tips flooded his company's HR department with allegations that forced them to suspend him pending investigation. My own career hung by a thread after my boss received doctored photos suggesting inappropriate relationships with clients and evidence of embezzlement that would have been laughable if it wasn't so professionally crafted. I was placed on administrative leave while they investigated, which meant no income while legal bills mounted from trying to fight back against the defamation. That's when cousin Melissa revealed her true colors in the cruelest way possible. Melissa and I had been close since childhood, or so I thought. She was one of the few relatives who'd seemed to remain neutral in the family divide, checking in on me regularly and offering emotional support. The truth came out when she accidentally sent me a text meant for Madison. I recorded our entire lunch conversation today. Charlotte suspects nothing. The stuff about David's family is gold, you can really use that. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. She laughed and admitted she'd been Madison's spy for years, recording our private conversations and reporting back every secret I'd shared. Every vulnerable moment, every fear, every private thought I'd trusted her with had been ammunition for Madison's arsenal. The betrayal felt like acid in my veins, especially when Melissa smugly informed me that Madison kept files on everyone in the family, detailed dossiers of secrets and weaknesses to be exploited when needed. The attacks escalated to target Dad when Blake's associates filed fraudulent lawsuits against his construction business, claiming workplace accidents that never happened and safety violations that didn't exist. His office was ransacked in a professional break-in that left no evidence except the message spray painted on his desk: "Stop investigating, or Charlotte pays the price." Client files were stolen, projects were sabotaged, and anonymous calls to building inspectors led to costly delays on multiple job sites. Dad's business, built over 30 years of honest work, began hemorrhaging money as clients fled the controversy. Through it all, Madison maintained her innocent act, telling relatives that Dad was paranoid and making up conspiracies, because he couldn't accept that his golden child Charlotte was actually disturbed. Uncle Robert, our family patriarch and Mom's brother, officially chose Madison's side by threatening to disown me entirely from the family if I didn't stop my vendetta against her wedding. He controlled the family trust that included my grandmother's estate, and his word carried weight with every cousin, aunt, and distant relative in our extensive clan. But it was Aunt Diana who revealed the most chilling truth during a secret meeting at a coffee shop. She showed me photocopies of diary entries Madison had written in high school, detailed fantasies about eliminating me from the family permanently. The entries described various scenarios, some involving accidents, others involving destroying my reputation so thoroughly that I'd have no choice but to disappear. Diana had found them while helping Madison move in college, but had been too afraid to say anything until now, when the fantasies seemed to be becoming reality. Despite every threat and attack, Dad and I made the decision to attend Madison's wedding uninvited. We weren't going to cause a scene or disrupt the ceremony. Dad had been working with his FBI contacts to coordinate something much more significant. The evidence he'd gathered through months of investigation was finally ready to present, and federal agents were prepared to move on Blake and his associates. We arrived at the Riverside Country Club to find security guards stationed at every entrance with printed photos of us, clearly instructed to keep us out at all costs. But we'd anticipated this and entered through the service entrance, aided by a catering staff member who'd been one of Dad's construction workers years ago. The venue was spectacular, no expense spared, with Madison's favorite white orchids everywhere and crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across the assembled guests. I spotted the federal agents immediately, trying to blend in as wedding guests, but standing out with their alert posture and strategic positioning throughout the room. Blake's criminal associates were less subtle, stationed like guards at every exit, with barely concealed weapons printing through their ill-fitting suits. The tension in the air was palpable, like everyone was waiting for a bomb to go off, though most of the guests remained oblivious to the danger surrounding them. The sixth betrayal hit me like a physical blow when I saw Nicole, my best friend since middle school, standing at the altar in a maid of honor dress. We'd been inseparable for 15 years, sharing every secret and supporting each other through every crisis. She'd been the one person I thought remained untouched by Madison's influence, the friend who'd held me while I cried after Ryan's betrayal and celebrated with me when I met David. Seeing her there in Madison's bridal party felt like having my heart ripped out and stomped on. When our eyes met, she had the audacity to smile apologetically, as if being secretly aligned with my tormentor was just a minor misunderstanding. Madison appeared in her wedding dress like an avenging angel in white, her smile sharp enough to cut glass when she spotted us in the crowd. She glided over with practiced grace, every inch the beautiful bride except for the malice glittering in her eyes. "I told you losers weren't invited," she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, playing the victim even now. "Security. These people are trespassing and trying to ruin my wedding." The fifth attack came as Blake's men moved to forcibly remove us, their hands reaching for concealed weapons as they advanced. But before they could reach us, David emerged from behind a column where he'd been waiting, and his presence changed everything. "Actually, they are with me," David announced, and that's when I noticed the FBI badge hanging from his neck. The reveal that my boyfriend had been working undercover with federal authorities to build a case against Blake hit everyone like a thunderclap. Madison's perfect mask finally cracked as she processed this betrayal of her betrayal, her face contorting with rage. But the seventh betrayal was still to come as Mom stepped forward to make an announcement that drove the knife deeper. She declared in front of everyone that she was transferring Charlotte's inheritance, including our grandmother's house that had been specifically left to me, to Madison as a wedding gift. The house where I'd spent every summer as a child, where Grandma had taught me to bake and told me stories about her own struggles with a cruel sister, was being stolen from me in the ultimate act of maternal betrayal. "I always get what I want, little sister," Madison hissed, her composure completely shattered now. "I got Ryan, I got Mom, I got the family, and now I get Grandma's house too. You're nothing, Charlotte. You've always been nothing, just a shadow trying to pretend it's a real person." That's when Dad stepped forward with the FBI agents flanking him, and announced in his commanding voice that the wedding was over because the groom was under arrest. The charges read like a crime novel. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and suspected murder in the disappearance of 3 women, including his previous fiancée. The room erupted in chaos as agents moved to arrest Blake and several of his associates, including 2 groomsmen who tried to flee. Madison's scream of rage was primal as she watched her carefully constructed future crumble. She turned on me with literal claws out, launching herself at me with years of pent-up hatred finally unleashed. The physical attack was brutal, her manicured nails raking across my face and drawing blood, while she shrieked that everything was my fault. Guests scrambled for their phones, filming the spectacular meltdown of the perfect bride, as she confessed to everything in her fury. She screamed about how she'd spent years destroying me, how she'd sabotaged every relationship and opportunity I'd ever had, how she'd orchestrated the attacks and threats. She even confessed to knowing about Blake's murders, saying she didn't care how many women he'd killed as long as he made her rich. The FBI agents were recording every word while trying to pull her off me. By the time they finally restrained Madison, the entire wedding had devolved into a crime scene. Blake was in handcuffs along with 6 of his associates. Madison was being read her rights while still in her wedding dress now splattered with my blood, and the guests were either fleeing or providing witness statements. The revelations didn't stop there, as the FBI announced they were investigating Madison's involvement in prescription fraud through her position as a surgeon, including selling opioids to Blake's network and potentially providing medical assistance to cover up crimes. Her medical license would be under review, her career destroyed along with her freedom. As they led her away, she turned back to look at me one last time, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it could have burned through steel. Madison's arrest should have been the end of the nightmare, but it was really just the beginning of a new chapter in her campaign to destroy me. She was released on bail within 48 hours, her lawyer arguing she posed no flight risk as a respected surgeon with community ties. The fact that her medical license was suspended pending investigation didn't seem to matter to the judge, who set bail at a figure Madison easily met using hidden assets the FBI hadn't yet frozen. The moment she was free, the attacks resumed with a vengeance that suggested she had nothing left to lose and wanted to take me down with her. The 7th attack began in cyberspace, as every social media account I owned was simultaneously hacked and flooded with horrific content. The sophistication of the digital assault indicated Madison had hired professionals, likely through Blake's remaining network. My Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter accounts began posting elaborate lies about my supposed criminal activities, drug use, and sexual deviance. Deepfake videos appeared showing me in compromising situations that never happened, so realistic that even I had to look twice. My professional reputation, already damaged by previous attacks, was obliterated as these posts were sent directly to every business contact, client, and colleague in my network. David's family started receiving threatening letters containing fabricated evidence of my supposed involvement in child pornography, causing his elderly parents such distress that his mother was hospitalized with chest pains. The eighth betrayal came from someone I'd trusted with my most vulnerable moments, Dr. Patricia Chen, the therapist I'd been seeing for 3 years to process childhood trauma and family dysfunction. Madison had somehow gotten to her, whether through bribes or threats, and Dr. Chen sold out every private session note, every confidential revelation, every moment of raw pain I'd shared in the supposed safety of her office. My struggles with depression after Mom chose Madison, my recurring nightmares about being erased from the family, my deepest fears about being fundamentally unlovable, all of it was weaponized and released online with my name attached. The violation of that sacred therapeutic trust broke something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. The eighth attack was more direct and physically destructive when my workplace was flooded by what was officially labeled a maintenance accident. Pipes that had been recently inspected somehow burst simultaneously on 3 floors, destroying servers, computers, and years of archived work. The security cameras mysteriously went offline an hour before the flooding began, and maintenance logs were altered to show false inspection records. My desk, specifically, was targeted with what appeared to be acid that destroyed personal items I'd foolishly left in the office. Colleagues who'd stood by me through previous attacks now kept their distance, afraid that association with me would make them targets too. The isolation was almost worse than the direct attacks, watching my professional community abandon me out of self-preservation. Madison's next move was to weaponize my past relationship with Ryan, recruiting him to join her harassment campaign with promises of money and revenge. He began showing up at my apartment building drunk and belligerent, screaming through the intercom about how I'd ruined his life and demanding to be let in to collect imaginary belongings. When I refused to engage, he escalated to throwing bottles at my windows and leaving dead animals on my doorstep with notes about how I deserved worse. The ninth attack turned genuinely dangerous when he broke through the building's security door and tried to force his way into my apartment. David was there that night and confronted him, only to be struck in the head with a crowbar Ryan had hidden in his jacket. The sight of David collapsing, blood pooling beneath his head, while Ryan advanced on me with the weapon raised, remains frozen in my nightmares. Neighbors called the police while I fought Ryan off with a kitchen knife, managing to inflict enough damage to make him retreat before he could seriously hurt me. David was rushed to the hospital with a severe concussion and skull fracture that required emergency surgery. Madison's influence extended even there, as the ninth betrayal revealed itself through the hospital administrator, Dr. James Morrison, who happened to be one of Madison's professional contacts. He attempted to have David transferred to a substandard facility across town, claiming their neurological unit was full despite empty beds visible on the floor. I had to threaten legal action and invoke patient rights to keep David where he could receive proper care, all while maintaining a vigil at his bedside and praying the surgery would save him from permanent damage. The stress of everything finally caught up with Dad when he suffered what doctors called a minor heart attack, though there was nothing minor about seeing my strong father clutching his chest and gasping for air in his office. Madison somehow learned about his hospitalization before I could control the information flow and began spreading rumors that I had poisoned him as part of my supposed mental breakdown. She convinced several relatives that I was dangerous and should be kept away from Dad's hospital room, resulting in humiliating confrontations with security when I tried to visit my own father. The 10th attack felt like the final straw when I returned to my new apartment, having moved after the break-in, to find it engulfed in flames. Everything I owned, including irreplaceable family photos and the evidence against Madison I'd foolishly kept in physical form at home, was reduced to ash and smoke. Standing on the sidewalk watching firefighters battle the blaze, wearing only the clothes on my back and clutching my phone like a lifeline, I felt something shift inside me. The tears didn't come this time. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me as I realized Madison would never stop until one of us was dead or destroyed completely. But she'd made one crucial mistake in her arrogance. Dad had copies of all the evidence in a safe deposit box, and I was done being a victim. The war she'd declared was about to become a battle she couldn't win, because while she'd been focused on destroying me, she'd failed to notice the allies gathering in my corner and the investigation closing in around her like a noose. The decision to stop playing defense and go on the offensive came while I sat in Dad's hospital room, watching him sleep off the medications from his cardiac procedure. David was recovering 2 floors up, and I'd been shuttling between their rooms like a ghost, running on coffee and rage. That's when I realized Madison's greatest weakness. She thought she was the only one capable of strategic planning. She'd spent so many years seeing me as a victim that she couldn't conceive of me as a threat. Using the investigative skills I'd learned from Dad and the technical knowledge David had taught me, I began building my own dossier on Madison, and what I discovered revealed a pattern of destruction that extended far beyond our family. 3 women came forward when I posted carefully worded inquiries on alumni forums and medical professional networks. Each told variations of the same story. Madison had befriended them, gained their trust, and then systematically destroyed their lives when they had something she wanted. Dr. Sarah Winters lost her residency position after Madison planted evidence of drug theft. Jennifer Chang's engagement ended when Madison seduced her fiancé and sent explicit photos to Jennifer's conservative family. Amy Rodriguez nearly committed suicide after Madison spread rumors about her mental health that cost her custody of her daughter. These women had suffered in silence, each believing they were Madison's only victim, until my investigation brought them together. We formed an unlikely alliance, bound by shared trauma and determination to see justice done. The 10th betrayal came wrapped in 20 years of deception, when my godmother Joyce asked to meet me privately. She'd been battling cancer, and wanted to clear her conscience before the end, she said. The story she told recontextualized my entire childhood. When I was 8, my beloved golden retriever Max had died suddenly, supposedly from eating poisoned meat left by a cruel neighbor. I'd been inconsolable, and Madison had been my greatest comfort, holding me while I cried and helping me bury him in the backyard. But Joyce had seen the truth, Madison feeding Max the antifreeze-laced meat, then watching from her bedroom window as I found his convulsing body. Joyce found Madison's journal entry about it, complete with drawings of how she'd planned it and notes about my emotional breakdown. She'd kept silent out of misguided loyalty to our parents, but the guilt had haunted her for 2 decades. The medical board investigation into Madison's prescription fraud opened floodgates of evidence I hadn't anticipated. Colleagues who'd stayed silent out of fear or professional courtesy began providing testimony about her illegal activities. She'd been selling prescriptions for opioids to Blake's network for years, using her position to acquire drugs that ended up on the streets. Worse, there was evidence she'd provided medical care to help cover up violent crimes, treating injuries that should have been reported to police and falsifying medical records to provide alibis. 3 nurses came forward with recordings they'd secretly made of Madison discussing these crimes, having documented her behavior out of concern for patient safety. The investigation revealed she'd been under suspicion for months, but her reputation and connections had protected her until now. The 11th attack should have been Madison's masterstroke, but it became her downfall instead. The FBI intercepted communications between Madison and a hired hitman she'd contracted through Blake's remaining network. She'd offered $50,000 for my death, specifying it should look like an accident or suicide given my supposed mental instability. The hitman turned out to be an undercover agent who'd infiltrated Blake's organization months earlier, and Madison walked right into a sting operation. The arrest footage, which somehow leaked to the media, showed Madison arriving at a parking garage to provide the down payment, complete with photos of me and detailed information about my routines. Her face when the FBI agents emerged from unmarked vans was a masterpiece of shock and rage, the mask finally gone forever. The 11th betrayal represented the beginning of the end, when Mom finally saw the truth. She came to me broken and sobbing, revealing that Madison had been drugging her for years with medications that increased suggestibility and memory problems. The revelation came during Madison's arrest, when investigators found bottles of psychotropic drugs prescribed to Mom, but filled by Madison personally rather than a pharmacy. Mom had recordings on her phone that she didn't remember making, conversations where Madison explicitly discussed her plans to destroy me and manipulate our mother into compliance. The drugs had been administered in tea during their weekly lunches, a ritual Mom thought represented bonding, but was actually chemical subjugation. Watching Mom's horror, as she realized the depth of Madison's evil, was both satisfying and heartbreaking. The extended family's awakening happened like dominoes falling as the truth became undeniable. Uncle Robert, who'd threatened to disown me, came forward with his own story about Madison attempting to manipulate his will through forged documents. Cousins shared incidents they'd dismissed as misunderstandings, but now recognized as calculated cruelty. Even those who'd been Madison's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the evidence piling up. The FBI recordings, the medical board findings, the testimony from multiple victims, and Madison's own confessions caught on tape. The family gathering called to address the situation was awkward and tense, with relatives struggling to reconcile their image of perfect Madison with the monster revealed. Some apologized sincerely, others made excuses for their blindness, but all agreed that Madison had manipulated them through careful exploitation of family dynamics and individual weaknesses. Blake's decision to testify against Madison in exchange for a reduced sentence provided the final nails for her coffin. He revealed that she'd been the mastermind behind several schemes he'd initially conceived, that her medical knowledge had been crucial for covering up crimes, and that she'd shown excitement rather than horror when learning about his murdered ex-fiancé. He had recordings of their conversations where Madison discussed various ways to eliminate me, comparing methods like a scientist planning an experiment. The sociopathic lack of emotion in her voice on those recordings chilled even the hardened FBI agents, who'd seen the worst of humanity. Blake painted a picture of a woman who'd found in him not just a criminal partner, but someone who could enable her darkest fantasies, and who'd pushed him to escalate violence, because she enjoyed the power it represented. The trial became a media sensation, with news outlets dubbing it the Sister from Hell case. Madison, who'd always craved attention and admiration, finally had the spotlight she'd wanted, but not in the way she'd imagined. I testified for 3 days, detailing decades of abuse and manipulation with documentation to support every claim. The other victims testified too, creating a pattern of behavior that no jury could ignore. Madison's defense attorney tried to paint her as mentally ill, a victim of family dysfunction, who'd developed a personality disorder, but the calculated nature of her crimes and her obvious enjoyment of others' pain undermined any sympathy play. When the verdict came back guilty on all charges including conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and racketeering, Madison showed no emotion except a slight smirk, as if she was already planning her next move. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole in 8, though additional state charges were still pending. The financial restitution ordered was substantial, requiring Madison to pay damages to all her victims from the considerable assets she'd accumulated through crime. The sale of her luxury condo, designer wardrobe, and jewelry collection barely made a dent in what she owed. Her medical license was permanently revoked, ensuring she could never again use her position to harm others. As they led her away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time, and I saw something unexpected in her eyes beyond the usual hatred, a flicker of recognition that she'd lost, that all her schemes and manipulations had ultimately led to her own destruction. Mom's journey to healing began with intensive therapy to process both the chemical manipulation and the emotional betrayal of choosing the wrong daughter for so many years. The drugs Madison had given her had caused cognitive effects that took months to fully clear, but as the fog lifted, Mom's horror at her own behavior grew. She entered therapy with a specialist in family trauma and began the hard work of understanding how she'd been manipulated while taking responsibility for her choices. Our relationship couldn't return to what it never was, but slowly, carefully, we began building something new. She attended every court hearing to support me, publicly acknowledged the wrong she'd done, and even testified about Madison's drugging during the trial. The process was painful and sometimes felt impossible, but the therapy helped us both understand that healing meant creating new patterns rather than trying to fix old ones. Dad's recovery from his heart attack was complicated by the stress of everything that had happened, but he faced it with the same strength he'd shown throughout the ordeal. His construction business, once near bankruptcy from Blake's sabotage, began recovering as clients learned the truth and returned with apologies and new contracts. Some even offered premium rates as a form of restitution for abandoning him during the attacks. Dad used the opportunity to hire more workers, including some of Madison's victims, who'd lost their own careers, creating a support network of people who understood trauma and recovery. His pride in my survival and growth became a constant source of strength, and our already close relationship deepened through shared adversity. David's recovery from the head injury was miraculous considering the severity of the attack. The neurosurgeon credited his youth and fitness for avoiding permanent damage, though he struggled with headaches and memory issues for months afterward. Our relationship had been tested in ways most couples never experience, but we emerged stronger and more committed. On the anniversary of the attack, in a small ceremony, with only genuine friends and family present, David proposed in the same hospital garden where he'd learned to walk again. Our wedding was everything Madison's wasn't. Intimate, genuine, and filled with people who'd proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. Dad walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Mom sat in the front row working to earn her place in our new life. My return to work came with an unexpected promotion, as the company recognized both my resilience and the skills I'd developed during the ordeal. Colleagues who distanced themselves during the attacks approached with apologies and renewed respect. I channeled my experiences into creating campaigns for nonprofits supporting abuse victims, using my marketing skills for something meaningful. The foundation I established for victims of family manipulation and narcissistic abuse grew rapidly, funded partly by Madison's restitution payments, in an ironic twist she surely hated from prison. Speaking engagements at conferences and universities allowed me to share my story and help others recognize toxic patterns in their own families. The book I wrote about surviving family betrayal became a bestseller, with proceeds supporting other victims' legal battles against their abusers. The decision to visit Madison in prison wasn't made lightly, but I needed to see her reduced circumstances for my own closure. She sat across from me in orange prison clothing, her perfect makeup and designer clothes replaced by harsh reality. Still, she maintained her arrogance, insisting she'd been victimized by a jealous sister and corrupt system. I didn't argue or engage with her delusions, simply informed her that I'd forgiven her, not for her sake, but for my own freedom. The rage that flickered in her eyes, when she realized forgiveness meant I was moving on without her, was the last satisfaction I needed. She could manipulate fellow inmates and plan future schemes, but she no longer had any power over me. I left her there with her hatred and walked into sunshine, finally free. My work with the foundation brought me into contact with hundreds of survivors, each with their own story of family members who'd tried to destroy them. One young woman, Claire, reminded me so much of myself at 25, struggling to understand why her brother systematically sabotaged every relationship and opportunity in her life. Helping her recognize the patterns, document the abuse, and build a legal case gave me purpose beyond my own healing. When she called crying with joy after her brother's arrest for fraud and stalking, I remembered my own relief at Madison's downfall and assured her the healing journey was just beginning. The foundation grew to include support groups, legal aid, and therapeutic resources, creating the comprehensive help I'd wished for during my darkest moments. Every person we helped escape their toxic family member was a victory against the Madison-like predators who counted on silence and isolation to continue their abuse. Standing in Grandma's house, which had been returned to me after the trial, I felt her presence in every room. The kitchen where she'd taught me resilience through baking bread, the garden where she'd shared stories of surviving her own cruel sister, the bedroom where she'd held me during childhood nightmares that turned out to be prophesies. Dad helped me restore the house to its former glory, and David's tech skills modernized it without losing its character. Mom visited monthly for carefully structured dinners, where we practiced our new relationship built on honesty and boundaries. The house became a symbol of reclaimed heritage and chosen family, filled with friends who'd proven themselves and relatives who'd learned from their mistakes. Madison had tried to steal this legacy, but instead, she'd inadvertently strengthened my connection to everything Grandma had wanted me to have: resilience, integrity, and the wisdom to recognize real love versus manipulation. Sometimes the best revenge truly is living well, building a life so full of genuine connection and purpose that the person who tried to destroy you becomes nothing more than a cautionary tale you share to help others. Madison sits in prison, no doubt plotting and scheming, but her power extended only as far as people's willingness to believe her lies. Once the truth was exposed, she was revealed as nothing more than a pathetic woman so consumed by jealousy and hatred that she destroyed her own life trying to ruin mine. Every day I wake up next to David, every family dinner with Dad and our slowly healing relationship with Mom, every person the foundation helps escape their own Madison, is proof that love and truth ultimately triumph over manipulation and evil. My sister texted, "You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser." But in the end, I'm the one who got to say goodbye, walking away from her darkness into a life filled with light she could never extinguish no matter how hard she tried. Looking back on this journey, I want to know if any of you have dealt with toxic family members who tried to destroy your life. How did you find the strength to fight back and reclaim your story? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and triumph. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with family manipulation, because sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward freedom. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the people who try hardest to destroy you often reveal their own weakness. Your strength lies not in fighting on their level, but in rising above it to build a life they can never touch. Stay strong, survivors. You're not alone, and your story matters too.